The silence in the penthouse was a physical weight, thick and suffocating. Arthur Croft sat in a wingback chair, the leather cold and unyielding against his back, and stared at the empty space on the mantelpiece. For 30 years, that spot had been home to a small, hand-painted ceramic dove, a clumsy, heartfelt anniversary gift from his late wife, Eleanor. Now it was gone. The new maid, a young woman named Maria with tired eyes and a quiet son, had been the only one in the apartment that day. The police report, filed hours ago, was a sterile document that used words like alleged and insufficient evidence. But Arthur knew. The hollow in his chest, a cavern carved out by grief 5 years ago when cancer took Eleanor, now echoed with a fresh, bitter betrayal. He felt the last vestiges of his trust, already brittle, shatter into dust. He would get the truth himself. The plan was born from a place of cold, calculated cynicism. Arthur, a self-made millionaire who had built an empire on reading people and anticipating deceit, would set a trap. He would pretend to be asleep in his study, a place he never napped, and leave his wallet, bulging with cash, and Eleanor's simple gold bracelet, the only other piece of hers he couldn't bear to keep in the safe, on the desk. A blatant test. A lure for a thief. The next day, he executed his plan with a heart of stone. He dismissed Maria early the previous night, telling her he had a migraine and would see her in the afternoon. He made a show of it. When she arrived, he was slumped in his chair, a blanket over his legs, his breathing deliberately slow and even. The wallet and bracelet lay in a pool of morning sunlight on his mahogany desk, gleaming temptingly. He heard the soft click of the door opening. Through slitted eyes, he saw Maria enter, her movements quiet and efficient. She began dusting, her back to him. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs, a traitorous drum of anticipation. This is it, he thought, a bitter taste in his mouth. She'll turn. She'll see it. She'll take it. And I will have my proof that goodness is just a performance for those who can't afford the ticket. But Maria didn't turn toward the desk. She finished her work near the bookshelves and was about to leave. Arthur felt a twist of frustration. Perhaps she was cautious. Then, her son, Leo, a small boy of about 7 with wide, curious eyes, peeked into the room. He pointed a small finger at Arthur, and in a whisper that carried perfectly in the silent room, asked, "Mommy, is the old man sick?" Maria hushed him gently, her hand on his shoulder. "Show me cielo. He's resting. We must be like mice." But instead of leaving, she did something that made Arthur's carefully constructed persona of sleep almost break. She walked toward him. His muscles tensed, ready to spring up and accuse her. But she didn't reach for the desk. She stopped right beside his chair. He could smell the faint, clean scent of laundry soap on her uniform. Her hand, warm and slightly rough from work, gently brushed the hair from his forehead. The touch was so unexpected, so profoundly maternal and kind, that it stole the breath from his lungs. Then, she carefully tucked the blanket tighter around his shoulders, her touch impossibly gentle. "He looks so sad, even in his sleep," she murmured to her son, her voice a soft melody of compassion. "Los ricos también lloran. The rich cry too, baby." She then took Leo's hand and quietly left the room, never once glancing at the fortune on the desk. Arthur remained frozen, not as part of the act, but because he was physically incapable of moving. Her words, her touch, they had dismantled him. They echoed in the silence she left behind, shaming his every assumption. He had expected theft and had been given tenderness. He had anticipated greed and was met with grace. The ice around his heart, which he had believed was permanent, cracked with a sound that was deafening in the quiet of his soul. Long after Maria and Leo had left the study, Arthur finally moved. He sat up, the blanket she had tucked around him now feeling like a shroud of his own shame. He looked at the wallet, the bracelet. They seemed garish and cheap compared to the invaluable kindness he had just been given. He spent the rest of the day in a haze, wandering through the opulent, empty rooms of his penthouse. Every polished surface, every expensive artifact, felt like an accusation. He had spent half a decade building walls to keep the world out, convinced that the world only brought pain and loss. He had mistaken Maria's poverty for a character flaw, her need for a job as a potential for moral failure. That evening, he didn't pretend to be asleep. He waited for her to finish her shift. When she came to tell him she was leaving, he asked her to sit down. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, a look he recognized now not as guilt, but as the anxiety of someone whose livelihood was perpetually precarious. "Maria," he began, his voice hoarse from disuse. "The ceramic dove that was on the mantel, it's missing." Her face fell, but not with the panic of a caught criminal. It was a look of profound dismay. "Oh, Mr. Croft. Lo siento mucho. I am so sorry. It broke 3 days ago. My Leo, he was chasing a dust mote. He lost his balance and his elbow caught it. It shattered on the hearth." Arthur stared, speechless. "I have been looking everywhere for a replacement," she continued, her words tumbling out in a nervous rush. "I took the pieces. I thought maybe an artist, they could fix it. But it is very old. The paint is special, no? I did not want to tell you. I was too afraid you would be angry and send us away. We need this job, Mr. Croft. I have been saving every penny to get it repaired properly. I swear to you." She wasn't a thief. She was a terrified mother, trying to fix a mistake, protecting her child from the wrath of a wealthy, unhappy man. The final ice within Arthur melted, flooding him with a pain more acute than any anger. He had been so lost in his own grief that he had become a person who inspired fear in a child and dread in a hard-working woman. He saw the truth now, not about her, but about himself. He was the one who was broken. The following weeks saw a thawing of the penthouse's permanent winter. Arthur did not fire Maria. Instead, he asked her, his voice thick with an apology he couldn't yet fully form, to forget about the dove. "Some things," he said, "can't be glued back together. And maybe they aren't meant to be." A fragile bridge was built. Arthur started taking his meals at the kitchen island instead of alone in the dining room. He began asking Maria small questions about her life, and she, cautiously, began to answer. He learned she had come to the city fleeing a bad situation, that she worked 2 jobs, and that her entire world was Leo. And Leo, a child unimpressed by wealth and unaware of stigma, became the unlikely architect of Arthur's renewal. He would draw pictures and leave them on Arthur's desk, a crayon sun, a stick-figure man with a surprisingly kind smile. One afternoon, he found Arthur staring at the empty mantel. "Are you sad about the bird?" Leo asked. Arthur could only nod. Leo thought for a moment, then said, "Mommy says when something breaks, you don't look at the pieces. You remember what it looked like when it was whole. That way, it's never really broken." The simple, profound wisdom, filtered through the heart of a child, landed with the force of a revelation. Arthur started to remember Eleanor not with the sharp pain of loss, but with the warm glow of gratitude. He began to live not inside his grief, but in honor of her memory. He hired a tutor for Leo so Maria wouldn't have to work a second job. He turned a spare room into an art studio for the boy. The silent penthouse began to fill with sounds, the sizzle of Maria's cooking, Leo's laughter, and eventually, Arthur's own. One evening, Arthur placed a small, new object on the mantelpiece. It wasn't a replacement dove. It was a framed photograph of Eleanor, her smile bright and alive. He wasn't erasing the past. He was finally accepting it. He looked at Maria, who was teaching Leo how to set the table properly. He felt a sense of peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. He had tested a maid for honesty and had instead been tested himself. He had failed, but in failing, he had finally found his way back. The millionaire had learned the most valuable lesson, that true wealth isn't measured in what you have, but in the compassion you give, and finally, allow yourself to receive. Moral of the story: healing begins not by guarding your heart against the world, but by risking it with compassion. The deepest wounds are often healed not by grand gestures, but by the quiet, unexpected kindness of others, if only we are open enough to see it and humble enough to accept it.